Christian Parenting.
Hi, Dr. Jones. Welcome to the Christian Parenting Podcast.
Thank you. It's a great joy to be with you.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have you here. We get to talk about college and purpose and our kids. And I think this is just a really timely conversation because there's one group of parents right now that is getting ready to send their kids off to college. Then there's another kid trying to start, or another group of parents starting to think about college. And then there's always people like me who are just thinking, what can I be doing right now to help set my kids up for success when we get to that point? So I just think this will be a very helpful conversation no matter how old your kids are. So thank you.
Delighted to be here.
Yeah. Okay. Well, first, tell us about yourself. Tell us about who you are, what you do, what your role is, so we can get to know you.
Sure. My name is Greg Jones. I'm the president of Belmont University. I'm a lifelong educator. I've been at Belmont now for 3.5 years. And so love welcoming new students to campus and then celebrating at the end of the year when those students graduate 4 years later. And it's just a great joy to be involved in education, helping form kids to be faithful and effective Christian leaders.
And what type of classes you teach? Because you teach a class on purpose as well, right? So tell us a little bit about that too.
Yeah, well, I have taught courses on innovation and forgiveness and other themes like that. But now every fall, my wife and I team teach a class called What's Your Why? That's about discovering a sense of purpose and having a North Star that can guide you, whatever your major or vocation. We have 12 colleges at Belmont, so we have people preparing for lots of different vocations, from healthcare to business to teaching to art and architecture to music and performing arts that we're especially known for. We want students to have a sense of purpose, and so we talk with them about discovering that sense of why that can help guide you through both your time at Belmont and then, more importantly, have a North Star that can guide you throughout life.
I love that. I think that's so helpful. And I love that you teach it with your wife too. That's so sweet. Yeah. That's amazing. Okay. And tell us about her. Tell us about your family, because this is Christian parenting. So we always want to get to know your family. So tell us about them. And then you have one word or phrase to describe your family.
So my wife and I have been married for 41 years, and we have 3 children who are all married. And 2 of those 3 children and their spouses have children. So we have 4 granddaughters currently. 7, 5 in one family and 5 and 2 in the other family. And we're hoping that our third child, our youngest, who's a daughter, and the one who lives in Nashville, might soon start a family. So it's great. And the phrase for our family, especially when we had them all together under our roof over Christmas, was joyful chaos.
Joyful chaos. Where everyone was at home for Christmas.
Everyone was in our house for Christmas. And having the 4 granddaughters who have lots of energy and creativity was part of why there was joyful chaos. It was joyful, and I was clearly not in charge.
Well, okay, so what's the best part about grandparenting?
I say there's nothing better in the world. Grandparenting is the only thing in the world that's not overrated. It's just pure joy. And being able to pour into your into your grandchildren and not be responsible for them 24/7 is ideal. So being able to spend time with them, and you learn a lot parenting your children. And so there are a lot of lessons learned. And actually my oldest son said to me, he said, I really wish you were with me the way you are with my kids. And I said, well, I've learned a lot over the years. And so, he was saying it affectionately, but also pointedly.
I mean, grandparents are always more fun with their grandkids than with their real kids.
Yeah, and I like doing the things that I resented my parents doing with my kids. So
totally.
That's part of a grandparent's job, is to spoil the grandchildren.
I remember my whole family went on a Disney cruise probably 5+ years ago. And when you ask my oldest the best day of his life, to this day, he will still say the last day of the Disney cruise, because Gaga took me and got me 11 ice cream cones. Growing up, I was lucky if he gave me 1 ice cream cone and not 11.
Yeah.
But that's his job. He's grandpa.
That's right.
Yeah. So fun. I love that.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's start with college. I would love to just start there. We'll talk about college. We'll talk about purpose, all the good things. But can you give some advice for parents and students who are beginning to look at colleges? Maybe like things to look for, how to discern what's best, like what questions people should ask on tours, just some practical and encouraging things.
Yeah. Well, I think choosing a college is about so much more than what sometimes people look at, which is rankings or prestige. It's really about fit. It's about formation. And it's about the future opportunities, to think about whether a campus and the culture of a campus is a good fit for who your student is, what's important to them as well as to your larger family, and what you hope they are going to discover because it's a formative time. And so to just look at the external kinds of things is to oversimplify what the real opportunity is. And so I think campus visits are really important in getting a feel for what would it be like to live here essentially for the next 4 years.
Do you think that there's just a lot of pressure on students to be looking at those outside things like rankings over fit and community?
Yeah, I do. I think and sometimes parents get overly anxious to be sure they get to the right place that sets them on the right trajectory when it's far more about where they're going to flourish and where they're going to discover what God's calling them to be and to do. College is about far more than just what's going to be happening on the day you graduate. I say to prospective students who are visiting Belmont and their families that, you're not making a 4-year decision, you're making a 40-year decision. And the real test of whether a university or a college has done a good job in preparing you is not what you're like on the day you graduate. It's what you're like 10 years out and 20 years out. And that's where we want to emphasize the intersections of purpose and character and an entrepreneurial mindset that's really focused on that.
Yeah. And you say that when parents ask the right questions, then kids feel equipped to make purposeful, prayerful decisions about their education, about anything. So what type of questions should parents be asking?
It's a great point. I think to ask what kind of community is going to surround my child and support their formation. Does the faculty and do the faculty and staff really care about students? So is it a focus on teaching or is it really more focused on research? You can get a feel for that and whether they're going to be surrounded to be encouraged. Or are there going to be people who come alongside their child to both challenge and support? So challenge is more obvious in the classroom and the hard work that's going to happen, but to also support because they're going to be rough times. These are times of being stretched and grow and learn. And are they going to have people that they can turn to who will come alongside and encourage them academically, socially, spiritually? Are there ways in which students are encouraged to be with each other? One of the difficulties of COVID was that students at a pivotal time of identity formation were separated from each other because a lot of what happens is who your peers are and who you're spending time with on campus. And so those opportunities to engage, what kind of community is really going to support? And then I think that we talked about it briefly earlier, but parents should ask, how does this university help my child or help students discover their purpose and form their character? Often we just look at the major or the credential or the skill set. And really it's about discovering that North Star. One of the interesting things that's happened with people, Susan, my wife, and I interview in our What's Your Why class, and we've interviewed people of great accomplishment ranging from 25 to 82. And all of the people that we've interviewed are doing something different than they thought they'd be doing when they were 18 years old. And so that larger sense of character formation and purpose is so important for really helping to ask the best questions in those sorts of ways for your long-term journey in life. And the third thing I'd say is, are there programs and mentoring opportunities? Because it's often, when you find what a friend of mine, Michael Lamb, calls attainable exemplars. So one of the things we do at Belmont is to offer students to spend time with a mentor who's 25 to 35, not at the top of their game. Sometimes an 18-year-old student will say, how do I become a president like you? And I thought, well, that's a pretty long journey of lots of twists and turns. I'm too far removed from the experience of an 18 to 22-year-old. But a 30-year-old, they're like, oh, I get it. So we had a young woman who's a wonderful songwriter in Nashville who visited our What's Your Why class. And it was so great to interview Emily because she could talk to them about remembering the first year out of college and what it felt like. And, how you're trying to build a career and get used to an apartment with a roommate and how you figure out, dating as well as working and navigating all of those dynamics. That's all stuff I vaguely remember from the long-term past, but having an attainable exemplar, that sort of mentor is really important. But I would say in general, when I talk about community and I talk about mentoring and I talk about purpose, what I'm really saying is, does this institution have the mission and values that align with mine? That doesn't mean it has to be a Christian university. It could be a state university, but you want to get a feel for the culture and the North Star of that university. And there are some that do that very well, And there are some that don't do that very well. And it's not just the branding of whether it's Christian or private or public. It's really about the larger culture.
Yeah, that's so interesting. As you're speaking, I'm thinking when I was 18 and graduated high school, my undergrad was at Pepperdine University in California. And I went there with a psychology major, and I was going to minor in industrial organizational psychology. I was going to work in business, and that was my plan. And it was solid. And then I went into youth ministry. So like a radical shift. I remember telling my parents, and my dad was like, "Are you sure? Because that's not what you planned." And then if you had told me when I went to grad school, if you had told me I was going to leave congregational ministry and eventually be running Christian parenting, I would have laughed. Like if you had told 18-year-old me that I would be sitting here hosting a podcast about Christian parenting, I would have just thought you were crazy.
Yeah.
But we all have ideas when we're 18.
Yes. And that's why having that larger sense of purpose amidst the twists and turns. And, one of the other things that I've learned through our What's Your Why class is how important friends and family are for helping you navigate all those journeys, because you're going to be having questions and you're going to hit a detour. You're going to hit a brick wall where you thought everything was laid out and you discover God had something else in mind for you. And having those relationships. And that's one of the things that I think we don't spend enough time with our own kids and families talking about friends and family and how important those relationships really are.
Yeah. My college roommates were, my best friends. Those are such formative years. Yeah. And the ones who walked with me as I decided, I think I'm making a career pivot. Like, I think I have a different purpose in this life. And so, yeah, those community relationships are so, so important and foundational for how we live our adult life.
Yes. And universities, I know Pepperdine well, and the president there's a good friend. It's a great university with too nice a campus and view. I don't know how you ever opened a book and studied there. But beyond that, Pepperdine, like Belmont, these are places where faculty walk alongside students. Mm-hmm. And I can't tell you how many times I've just loved talking to Belmont alumni, and they'll name a specific professor or a specific staff person, and they'll say, "Oh, that person changed my life." And they're talking not about what happened necessarily in the classroom, but what was the ideas that were expressed there. It often was what they said in a hallway conversation, or the way they poured into them, or the way they helped them navigate all sorts of things, a breakup and other kinds of things. And just hearing those discoveries and those relationships, it's really powerful.
Yeah. So for parents who are listening and they're thinking like, okay, I want to help my child start to find their North Star, start to find their purpose, so that they can make more, I don't want to say informed, but decisions that will kind of like help guide them to that place. How do parents help their kids start to find their purpose? And then maybe the next step would be in college when they're on their own.
Yeah. It's a great question. And a lot of it is just listening to the joys and griefs and hopes and dreams and struggles that kids have. And it's being able to say, not just what do you want to major in, or getting tactical too quickly, but saying, what makes your heart sing? And what brings you the greatest joy? And I suspect, that for you, part of that with going into youth ministry was discovering relationships and pouring into younger people, and discovering that is really powerful. I remember talking with one of our recent graduates who was super talented, a student athlete, and was heading to medical school and thought she was going to be a surgeon. And I said to her one day, she said, "I'm just not happy studying for the MCAT." And I said, "Well, what makes your heart sing?" And she says, "Being with people." And I said, "Well, you could have a surgical team being with people, but your patient's going to be asleep most of the time. If you're a surgeon, do you want to think about a different role in medicine?" And it opened up a conversation for her where eventually she decided that she wanted to actually not go into medicine. She wanted to go into public relations because that was much more who she was. And it took some conversation with her dad, who was clear she was going to be pre-med and going to be a doctor. That conversation was different. So for the parent, it was listening to what makes your child's heart sing. And sometimes if you feel like you're supposed to go into some vocation, but it's not where your heart sings. I had a friend when I was growing up who thought he was supposed to become a doctor, but he hated science. And his parents weren't able to hear him say he hated science. And he ended up dropping out of college. And it was really a tough thing because they couldn't hear what really made his heart sing. So I think discovering purpose is about being able to say, what brings you the greatest joy? What makes your heart sing? And how can you be stretched in that way? And
Yeah.
it becomes a beautiful journey. Sometimes, kids can get paralyzed if parents say too directly, figure out God's plan for your life. We do a thing in our What's Your Why class where we have students do what in the book Designing Your Life talks about as an Odyssey plan, where you have to chart out your next 5 years, what you think is most likely, an alternative path. And then the third one is, what would you do if money or reputation or status was irrelevant?
Mm.
And pretty consistently at first, our students just freeze because they think they're supposed to have one plan. And that's supposed to be discerning what God's plan for them is. And we say, this is just a thought experiment. Just try this. And when they begin to trust the experience of thinking about three alternatives, sometimes they feel set free. And interestingly, I've gotten emails from parents thanking me for helping their kid be more creative in thinking about their future. And sometimes children think they have to follow what their parents may have not intended to say, this is what you should do, but they hear this message subtly. And so it's been surprising to me. And I tell students, I say, your parents may want you to be more creative than you think they want you to be. Now, sometimes you do have parents who say, you will be a business major or you will get a job that pays X dollars a year. But more often than not, I think parents want children to flourish, and that may be in youth ministry, or in my oldest son's case, he wanted to sing opera. And I said, great, you've chosen the one vocation that pays less than the ministry. But music really is his life, and it's something really powerful, and helping set him free to discover how he could make a life in that way. Part of that was marrying a doctor, so his wife actually brings home more of the income. But it's about really finding that alignment with where, as Frederick Buechner says about vocation, where your greatest joy meets the world's deepest hunger. That's where you're called of God to go. And discovering where that greatest joy and that deepest hunger. I say, what the world hungers for is not only food, it hungers for beauty. And so the ways my oldest son nurtures beauty through singing is really a wonder to behold, especially because I have zero singing ability.
I love that. Yeah, that's so true. But what would you say for parents who maybe their kids have a little less direction, like they feel like they're floundering a little bit and they're like, I truly don't know what my purpose is. Like I don't know. Like how can they help the people who are just maybe unsure?
Patience is a key, and keeping the conversation going.
Yeah.
Because they'll discover it. One of the most successful people we've had in our What's Your Why class, he now works with us at Belmont, but Rick Recadal was known for many years for his leadership at DreamWorks out in LA. And he was chief creative for global franchises and, was involved in Shrek and How to Train Your Dragon and all sorts of really wonderful Trolls, all sorts of wonderful films. He started out as a cello performance major at Viola and then discovered that wasn't his calling. And so he eventually switched to marketing and eventually moved into a job of storytelling. And it took him 6 years to get through undergraduate. One of our students said, what did your parents think about it taking 6 years? And he said, well, it was difficult because it involved more tuition costs than, if I'd finished in 4 years. And he said, so it was hard at times. He said, but what my parents and I both eventually discovered is, and this is what he said, you can never be late on the timeline of your own journey. And I heard 150 clicks. Everybody in our class wanted to write that phrase down. And as a parent, I was as focused on getting my kids through and getting them to a good job and, using the phrase that they're off the family dole or off the payroll and on their own and all that independence thing. But sometimes kids take longer and need to figure things out. We've got to be willing to let them do that, because sometimes you'll find that the kids will have a more difficult time if we're impatient in trying to get them to figure something out. So, that's the twists and turns, and providing the support and encouragement with tough love sometimes, and saying, we're not just going to keep you on the dole forever to just kind of explore anything. Maybe you need a part-time job to help pay your bills as well. But it's that patience and that love and continuing to help them discover who God's called them to be.
Yeah, I do love that, because we do put a timeline on ourselves and on our kids too, as like we want them to follow certain milestones and do things the norm, if you will. And that's not really everybody's journey all the time. So I think that's just a really good reminder, especially as kids are in college and you're like, okay, 4 years, and then you're going to get a job, and then you're going to, do all these things. It's a great reminder that sometimes it just looks a little different.
Yeah. And one of the things I learned and have to be continually reminded is that every child you have is different, whether they're your biological children or adopted. That, I jokingly say whoever started the nature versus nurture debate did not have children, because you learn pretty quickly with your children, especially if they're biological, that, they're kind of hardwired the way God brought them into the world. And, all the things that I learned that worked with my oldest child didn't work with my middle child, much less my younger child. And so you've got to learn to appreciate the particularity of each child and their gifts and their limitations and their blind spots, and walk that journey with each child as the particular child that God created them to be.
Yeah. You have to parent the child you have, not the one you expected.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
What are some of the trends that you're seeing in like current and upcoming group of college students? I guess like good and bad. Like what would you say to parents kind of regarding some of those trends?
Well, I think that one big trend is this desire for purpose and impact. I think that there is a sense that young people have that the world my generation is handing them is not a very healthy or happy world. And so they're looking for deeper purpose. They're wanting to make an impact. They're kind of impatient with the status quo, and they don't want to just follow the footsteps of their parents or grandparents. So they're wanting to chart their own path with that sense of desire for purpose. And there's a yearning for that. I think they're also really wanting to do interdisciplinary work, which can get to the deeper questions that they know that, sometimes the disciplines or schools that currently exist aren't getting to the deeper issues. And so they're wanting to find ways to solve problems and be creative in those ways. Those are some of the positive things I see. I see on the deeper trends a lot of anxiety and mental health challenges. They're uncertain about the future. They're uncertain about their future as well as the world's future. And so there's a lot of anxiety. It was intensified by COVID, but it wasn't created by COVID. And so that anxiety and uncertainty, it manifests itself sometimes as depression or anxiety, but it's also manifests itself just by loneliness. And so being more intentional about the connections. I was kind of heartbroken at the end of the last semester. We had a student in our class, and her mom contacted me to say that her daughter had loved our class, but she was going to transfer. And I said, well, why? And she said, well, she just didn't make friends this fall. She had transferred to Belmont, so she didn't go through our normal orientation as a freshman. She'd transferred in. So at our final design showcase, I went to see her, and we said, tell us about your semester. She said, I loved every one of my classes. The professors were terrific. Every class, your class has been just amazing. I said, well, we're sorry you're sensing a desire to transfer. And she said, yeah, I'm just lonely. And I realized that we'd done everything formally right as a school, and we'd missed her loneliness and hadn't helped her discover a friend group. She lived off campus because she was a transfer, all those sorts of things. And I think that's a trend that we need to pay a lot more attention to going forward. The last one I'd highlight that's a mixed bag is that students are more impatient about what the purpose of college is. And so they're much less just thinking they need a 4-year college. And so we've got to do a better job of helping students and parents see the value proposition, that it's not just about a job, because you can go to Google or other things that don't require a 4-year degree. It's not the same requirement that it once was. And so what is the value proposition? And I think a trend is to say, do I really need this? And that's where coming back to purpose and character formation really helps you say, by the way, this isn't just about skills or a credential. And it is, like you were talking about your college friends. It's about relationships that may help to shape you and sustain you for the next 40 years.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you say that, because my oldest is in middle school, so I got a ways before we're at college, but I was just saying, it's going to happen sooner than I want it to. And I feel like I already hear people saying that they don't really care if their kids go to college, and that if it's not for them, that's okay. And my husband and I have had that same conversation, and I don't feel like that's a conversation that my parents ever had. Like, it was just an assumption that you would go to a 4-year college and get a degree. And it's interesting that you're seeing that shift.
Yes. And it's a huge shift. And, I thought when I was in high school, there was nobody in my school who didn't assume they were going on to college. Now, not everybody did, but you kind of looked down. It wasn't, are you going to college? It was, which colleges are you applying?
Totally.
I think that's a very different environment that we need to navigate. And colleges have done a poor job on the whole of articulating what matters and what's the difference maker. And, that's where I think saying it's not just for parents to understand, they're not just making a 4-year decision, it's a 40-year decision.
Right.
Because it's about what you're helping your child set him or herself up for relationally, in terms of character, in terms of kind of that North Star sense of purpose, as well as competency in a particular field.
Yeah. Well, I love that students are asking though, I want more purpose in my life. And since I want more purpose, like, is a 4-year college or this specific 4-year college going to help me to find that? Like, that's such a great question that I literally never thought of. Like, it just was like, which college seems great? And where am I going to get the major I want in I chose Pepperdine. So the location that I want, like I never thought about my purpose ever.
Well, and candidly, with my own children, we didn't have that conversation the way I wish we did now. And, my kids, I was at Duke and my kids went to Duke, and it was a great school, great brand. And, in some ways, I think they would have been, at least one or two of them would have been better off at a place like Belmont. But, I let them kind of drive the decision, and we weren't asking some of those questions, some of those deeper questions.
Yeah. Interesting. Really interesting. So much to think about. Okay. So for parents their kids are inevitably going to have some rejection from a college, but before that, there's going to be the sports team and the friends and the relationships and all the things. But thinking in college and beyond too, there's job rejections. I mean, it's just kind of part of life, and college is a big one though. I mean, that one is heartbreaking to get rejected from the college of your choice, especially if you're really purposeful in your decision making. Like, I think this is what I want to do because this is my calling for my life. And I think this is what God wants me to do. And then you don't get in. So how can parents walk with their children if they get rejected from the school of their choice?
It's a great question. I think I'll go back to Emily Falvey, the songwriter who visited our What's Your Why class, because songwriters get rejected all the time. They write songs and then they hope it'll get picked up, and then it doesn't get picked up. And what Emily said was she's learned that to change the language from rejection to redirection. And boy, did the students write that down. And it showed up in their final projects that rather than thinking of rejection, think of redirection. It's taking the long view. And it's hard in the moment, but it's just to keep that space open. Now, part of that is for your child to say, it's okay to be disappointed. It's okay to hurt. Not to say, oh, don't worry about it. It's their loss. And, if you trivialize it, then they're just going to feel like they can't express their disappointment. And saying, let me tell you a story about when I was disappointed or when I got rejected, and how in the long run that turned out to be a gift in that way. And I think that really can be powerful, and to remind people that there are lots of paths to success. That people sometimes assume that they have to go into the college of their first choice. And then you look at stories of people who've had remarkable careers who were turned down by their first choice, or who ended up having to go to 2 different colleges, or started out at a community college, or whatever the case may be, and tell those stories that it's not about just one path. Their identity is not shaped by an acceptance or a rejection letter. And, sometimes the worst thing that can happen is to get accepted to your first choice. And then you start thinking, well, I'm the greatest thing since sliced bread, and you lose that larger context. So whether it's acceptance or rejection, it's that sense of knowing what the direction is and how to cultivate that, and to recognize that you always can grow and you're called to grow. And having that growth mindset rather than a fixed mindset is really important. And to walk alongside your child, because, as I think about my own life, one of the things that I thought was absolutely devastating rejection when I was 16 now seems absolutely trivial to me. And some things that I thought were of minor significance turned out to be life-changing, positive things. And so, taking that long view and helping people recognize that, and I just think about if I could tell my 17-year-old self what really matters, boy, I would have lived different.
I was just talking to a friend just last week, and I'm reminded of it and we were talking about walking with our kids as they're going through some rejections and just struggles, just hard struggles in school and sports or whatever. And she was saying, she's like, I was a student where things came easy to me. I had a lot of friends. I never really had any major friendship drama, relationship drama. She's like, I didn't have any rejection in my life until she was rejected from nurse anesthetist school when she was near 30 years old. And she was like, up until then, everything's what I wanted, I got it. And she's like, I worked hard, but I got it. And she's like, I don't think that really has served me super well in my life. And she's like, I mean, it's great, but like, she's like, when I look at, so now when my kids are struggling through something, I just think it's really hard to watch them struggle, but they're learning a skill that I never had to learn.
Yeah. I think that's so important. And I remember reading an article by a psychiatrist in New York City who was talking about how her training had equipped her to help her counsel people who'd gone through significant traumas, parents divorcing or addiction or crises of various sorts. And what struck her was that she was actually dealing with children, young adults who were successful and had never been allowed to fail, because they had helicopter parents who protected them every step along the way. And they were coming in feeling empty, and they didn't know how to navigate a lack of purpose or how to navigate minor rejection or relationship difficulties. And I really think that we can sometimes overprotect and shelter too much. And so, letting kids have experiences of struggle. And I remember when our oldest child bought a dozen roses for his first girlfriend in middle school, and he was so excited. And I just thought it was so cute to watch him buy these roses at the grocery store. And the cashier said, "Oh, I wish I knew somebody like you," because, she clearly was lonely herself. And then the girl accepted the rose and the next day broke up with him.
No.
And he's 12 years
That
old.
breaks my heart.
And he was just heartbroken and just was sobbing. And my wife and I wanted to fix it for him. We wanted to, and I wanted to go, tell that girl off. And it became a really important journey for him. But it killed me for a while to see my son, who had just been, he hadn't been a jerk. If she'd broken up with him because he'd been a jerk, that would be one thing. But he was being really sweet, and he used his allowance to buy these roses. And yet that became a really important part of his journey, as hard as it was on Susan and me.
When you're a kid, though, you're never thinking like, wow, this must be really hard for my parents too.
That's right.
Like, literally never. You have no idea that your parents' hearts break just as much as yours, if not more too,
Yep, that's right.
That really does break my heart. Even now, I could just cry thinking about it.
Well, it still stings a little bit for me. I'm still kind of grumpy at that girl. I have no idea where she is or what she's doing, but I still feel it for him, even though he's happily married and has two beautiful daughters of his own.
You're going to see her in a grocery store someday and be like, you don't remember me, but I remember you. That's funny. Okay. I really love this conversation. I'm so grateful just to hear from you with your experience working with so many students, having your own kids, having grandkids. You just have so much wisdom to share. And I would love just to wrap us up for you to share, but what is one thing that you want every parent to know?
I would say that the words at the end of 1 Corinthians 13, faith, hope, and love abide, and the greatest of these is love. I think those three words, faith, hope, and love, are so important in raising children. It is clearly, we think a lot about love, and that's at the heart of it all. But I also think about hope, and that's a long-term view of the future. Hope's not just optimism. Hope is acknowledging the brokenness and the suffering and the struggles along the journey, and continuing to trust God. And faith, that to recognize that God is sovereign and the source of all goodness, that we want to instill that, but that doesn't mean we can coerce them. I remember when my oldest son at age 12 told my wife and me, both of whom were ordained pastors, that he was an atheist. And we went through a crisis because we thought we failed. We're just the most miserable parents. Well, he was just kind of declaring his adolescent independence. Then he ended up going to seminary himself. And so, taking the long view about what it means to form people in faith and recognize the twists and turns of those journeys and not overreacting in any moment. But I would just say, keeping those three words, faith, hope, and love, at the heart of what you do in relationship with your children, as well as with your spouse and parents and friends and others. I just think faith, hope, and love abide. And the greatest of these is love.
I feel like that story is so important for parents like me with kids at my stage, because my oldest is 12, almost 13, just to have the reminder, he has only had 13 years of his life. Like, he has a lot more life ahead of him. And so not to freak out and to have that hope of the long game is just a really good reminder to just not stay in the moment too much when they do things like decide they're an atheist for a moment, because they're going to do something like that.
Yep. And that's even true. I'm now well past 13,
Yeah.
reminding myself that whatever I'm feeling in the moment isn't going to last, that this too shall pass, and to take the long view of my own life as well as those I love and have been entrusted to be a parent or a grandparent for.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. That is such a good reminder. And I really just appreciate all of your insight. So thank you for joining me today. I think my listeners will really appreciate you.
Well, such a delight. And you ask great questions. And I love the focus you have on Christian parenting. It's so important. It's the most important vocation a lot of us are entrusted with, is to help bring along the next generation. And it's hard work. So I really am grateful for the leadership that you're providing and the connection you offer to all of your listeners.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Christian parenting.